In family types, we should have the metric and imperial level types created. And now we can go on to build the graphics. So if you haven't done that yet, you hit the new family types button here, and you're creating an imperial level type that has so you have the imperial level type that's got the imperial level box checked, and then you have the metric level type which has the imperial level box unchecked, and metric will automatically be checked because of this formula. All right, so hit OK, and now what we're going to do is build the graphic on the to the right of these labels. So if you look at the bottom of page 4, you can see what we're going to do. Now, while I am doing this, I'm going to go to the View tab, and I'm going to turn on Thin Lines mode. Now, I'll show you why. The next thing we have to do, so just bear with me for a second here, keep your eyes on the screen. We're going to use the filled region command, and we're going to use the solid black filled region. But instead of level heads as the line style, we're going to use invisible lines. And here's why. If I make this triangle right now, you'll notice that the triangle has sort of rounded lines to it. And that's because when Revit does line work, it fillets based on the thickness of the line weight. Now, I don't want to fillet. I want that to be razor sharp, something you'd cut your finger on the end of it. So what I'm going to do is, instead of using level heads as the line style, I'm going to use invisible lines. Now initially it's going to look just as blocky as the other ones, but when you finish, look at that. It's super sharp. But while you're drawing it, it does look pretty blocky, and that's a bit distracting. So what I can do is I can go to the View tab and turn on Thin Lines while I'm working on this. So as I'm working, we don't see any line weights, and everything just gets shown as a hairline. So let me show you the best way to get this drawn. So go to the Create tab, start the Filled Region command, and then switch to the Invisible Lines subcategory for drawing these lines. Now we're going to draw the triangle first. We can't draw the triangle and a little bar at the same time, because the sketch lines would come to a point and Revit would freak out about that. So we have to draw the triangle and the little bar separately. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to switch to Invisible Lines, grab the Line tool, start right here at the intersection, and I'm going to draw up 1/8 of an inch, and then I'm going to come across 1/4 inch, so the reason I did this is just so that I'd have my triangle exactly where I want it. So I'm going to draw another line at the bottom across like so, and you'll see that it lines up. So I'm going to end up with a U-shaped series of these lines. So up 1/8 of an inch, over 1/4 of an inch, and then another one here at the bottom. Just allow me to snap to it. So here I go. Now I'm really drawing the triangle from the end point to the midpoint, and then from the midpoint up to the corner of the triangle, and then I'm going to delete these other 2 lines, which were just there as construction lines to help me get started. So that's what we want to end up with. Invisible lines, and I changed to Thin Lines mode as well. So on the View tab, I've got Thin Lines turned on, and then when I'm drawing the filled region, I'm using the Invisible Lines subcategory. So what I did to make my construction lines So here I'll start right from scratch. So I'm going to draw from the intersection of the two reference planes. I'm going to go up 1/8 of an inch, 1/8 inch. Then I'm going to come over 1/4 inch. There we go. And I'm going to hit escape once, just once, because I'm still wanting to use lines. And I'm going to start at the intersection of two reference planes again and come over again 1/4 inch. Now the reason I'm doing this is I wanted to get sort of these two construction lines in place so that when I draw the triangle, I'll have a midpoint that I can snap to. There we go. And then I'm going to delete those two construction lines and finish. And there's my nice sharp graphic for a triangle, because I'm using invisible lines for the boundary edges of this solid hatched area. And then just draw the rectangle at the bottom, which will be quite easy. Okay, so once this is done, you should have what you see up here, and we're going to save this as my level head. And so, bottom of page 4, please, we're going to put this into a project. So I've called it my level head and I've saved it. So now what we need to do is use this in a real project. So just type Control N on your computer, and from the dialog that pops up, choose the architectural template. So Control N, and then choose architectural template out of the menu, and hit OK. Yeah. You can't. Revit, the shortest segment that Revit will let you draw is 1/32 of an inch. 1/32 of an inch. Yeah.
So we just save on the desktop as a...
Yep, my level head. Yep. All right, so I've got this new project here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to one of the elevation views here. So I'm going to use my graphic instead of the one that you see here. So what I need to do is get that level head family and load it in here. So I'm going to go to Insert and Load Family and get it off the desktop here where I've got it. So there's my level head. I'm going to load it in. So the level head is loaded, but it's not being used. So if I go into the families list and into annotation families, you will see my level head right there. So there's already 2 other level head families in this project which are probably being used. But at this point, we need to employ our newly loaded family here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and select one of these levels here. And we're going to make 2 level styles. One that shows metric, one that shows imperial. So first of all, we've already got an imperial level style here. So I'm going to go to Edit Type, and I'm going to rename this to Imperial Level. So I'm renaming the 1/4 inch head level style, and I'm renaming it to Imperial Level. Now that I've done that, in the symbol parameter here, I'm going to go and find my level head right here, and we've already got one that's named Imperial Level, so when I choose this one and hit OK, our new graphic appears in its place. Now what we also want to do is to have a metric version of this level. So what we're going to do, select one of those levels again in your view, go find Edit Type, and we're going to make a duplicate, and this one's going to be called Metric Level. So we've taken the Imperial Level and we've duplicated it, and we're going to call it Metric Level.
For the Imperial one, we need to rename it, yes?
Yeah, we do, just to help distinguish it one from the other. So from the symbol field, it's still going to be the My Level Head family, but this time we're going to use the metric level type that we created inside the level head family. And hit OK. So now we have a metric level and we have an imperial level. So if we want our levels in the project to be in metric, there we go. Now, the purpose of this, folks, is to show you that you could, in the context of a single template, have a project that can be very readily switched into a metric style project using one family. So that one level head family is doing double duty. It's showing us meters when we want it to show meters, and it will show us feet and inches to the nearest 1/8 of an inch when we want it to do so. So why do we go through all this trouble? Well, most commonly, when you do a project in metric, what basic unit do you use? Millimeters, right? So you usually use millimeters as the project unit, but commonly we don't use millimeters for the height of our levels, we use meters. It's more of an appropriate unit for the height of each story in our project. So this means that if someone does switch the units of the project to millimeters, so here I go to Manage and then Project Units, and then switch it to millimeters here. So if the project gets switched to millimeters, the levels are still going to report their height in meters. So that's the intent. So most projects that I've seen report the height of their levels in meters. Now, of course, if you want it to report to 3 decimal places, what we'd have to do is go back to our family and then find our metric label here, go in and edit it, and change its units here to 3 decimal places instead of 2. So if I change it to 3 and then load it back into my project, there you go. It shows 3 decimal places instead of 2. So that is something that's up to you. So if you want to, you can save, well, you need to save this in by next week's class. Okay, we're going to move on. No, the project, because the family will be inside it. So so here it says at the bottom of page 4, edit the levels type properties and change the symbol parameter to use this family, and then save the project as custom level head assignment in your share in folder. So that's that assignment done. Okay, I'll give you folks another minute or two just to wrap things up, and then we're going to move on to page 5. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to move on and talk about some of the other annotations that get used in your project. So close everything down to the Revit desktop so we can all start from scratch together. So save everything and then just go back down to the Revit desktop so we can all start from scratch using the architectural template. Now, when you're trying to create the custom graphics for your office, what most people find is the easiest way to go is to start with your architectural template and then modify it to your requirements. So what I'll do here is I've got this architectural template open, and to start this whole process off, I'm going to go to the File menu, Save As, and Template. So this will be the ongoing project that you would embark upon to create your office's own template. So it might take you a few projects before you kind of figure out what you need to have in your template. But always have your template handy so that you can add stuff to it or make some modifications to it as time goes on. So typically what I have done when offices have needed me to get their graphics customized in the software is to take the families that are already here in the architectural template and modify them so that the office is happy with the appearance of these graphics. So let's look at grid heads on the top of page 5. So when you use the grid tool, Revit creates a circle of a certain size and puts some text inside it. It's Arial font. All of Revit's graphics are based on the Arial typeface. So if you want to modify that, you have to address the family that's being used inside here. So if we go into the annotation symbols folder, we can go down and find the probable suspects in terms of how this grid bubble appears. So easiest thing to do, go into the template, find the family that's being used for the grid circle, right click and edit it. Yeah, just open up the architectural template, and then I went down to the families folder, expanded it, found the annotation symbols folder, expanded it, and went down to the grid head circle family, right clicked on it and chose edit. So you folks can go ahead and do that. Now, when I make my grid bubbles, I like them to be noticeably heavier than the grid line. It just makes it easier to locate these grid heads in the drawings. So when I go and modify this grid now, so this line around the outside, its line weight is driven by its subcategory. See it here? Grid heads. So if I were to go back and look in the project, I could find the line weight that's being used for grid heads. So I'm just going to tab back to the project here. So the line weight of your grid heads is controlled in object styles. Manage object styles. So if I want to change the line weight of my grid bubble, I go into object styles and find the annotation tab, and then down under grid heads, you can see here, I'll change it to a line weight of 3. So now you can see my grid heads have just a slightly heavier line weight, and I just find that when you look at a set of drawings and you see that little bit of extra line weight there, that's it just shows a little bit of attention to detail in terms of your graphics. Now, back when we're editing the grid head, the family itself also has object styles. So when I'm editing my annotations, if I go to the Manage tab, your families also have an Object Styles dialog box. But here's the thing. If inside your grid head family, if I went to Object Styles and I changed the line weight here and hit OK, you can see the line weight gets thicker around the edge of my grid number. But if I load this back into the project, it's not going to change the line weights. So here, I'm going to make it really quite thick, like a 6. Really thick. But when I load this back into the project, nothing changes. So what happens is the subcategory is still here in the project. So in my project, when I go to Object Styles and then I go to the Annotation Objects tab and then go down to Grids, it didn't change it here. So just remember, if you want to change something, a line weight is something, you've got to do it in your project, not in the family. So if you want to change something with your grid head, typically what you'll end up doing is maybe changing the radius of the circle. So you might find that 1/2 inch is too big a diameter. So if you want to make it a little bit smaller, you can. And then of course you can choose a different typeface and a different size for the text if you feel like this is too large. So that font I told you folks about tonight, technical. So I can go in here into technical and I'm going to make it bold. So now I've got a technical font that's being used, and if I load this back into the project, instead of being Arial now, it's going to use that technical font for all of my grids. So you save your template, you got it ready to go, you edit the families sort of one at a time, make the changes you want, then load them back into your project and redefine the version of them that's in your template that you're developing. So you just kind of work your way down the list, and it's something that you do over a series of weeks. You know, you don't have to really rush into it. So grid heads are what we call a loaded family, where you load the grid head into your project, and then in the type properties of your grids, there's the symbol that's being used. So grid heads and level heads fall into this category. Now, section heads are the next thing that we're going to look at here. Now, you can see here we've got the section head filled family. It's in the list underneath annotation symbols. And so there is a template, a special template for building section heads, but don't even bother with the template. Just start with the out-of-the-box section head that's here, right-click on it, and edit it. So here's the out-of-the-box template. If you look on the notes on page 5, you can see that the section head that I'm showing here has some extra reference planes that are turned on, and we should do that here as well. So on the Annotation Categories tab, the reference planes category was turned off. So now we're kind of seeing what we saw in the notes. Now, there's a kind of a little bit of magic in the way Revit works with these section heads. When you make a section in Revit, the software keeps the text inside the circle horizontal with the drawing area. So just to prove the point, if I draw a section on the screen, so you look at the center part of the section. See, it's keeping that line horizontal, and it's keeping the text oriented in a major axis of the screen, regardless of the angle that I draw the section on. But you can see the section head rotates per the direction of the section. So when you're making your section head here, just know that anything inside the circle doesn't move, the text doesn't rotate, but the other graphics do. Now, if you want to make the section head larger or smaller, just have a look at the text. If you are creating your own section head, adjust the left vertical reference plane so the section line will connect at the right location. So what this means is you're not supposed to move the right reference plane. It's just kind of a weird thing. So if you want to make your section graphic, your section marker, larger or smaller, you must move the left reference plane sideways to adjust to the new size. So here, I'll even show here, if we use the Revit template for the section head, right here. Do not move the horizontal or the right reference plane. So that means don't move this one and don't move this one, but you can move the one on the left. So when you go back and look at the one that Revit provides, you don't move the right one or the horizontal one. Now you can see here that there's some text here that's called sim. That means similar. So that is the text that appears if you were making a similar type section in the software. So have a look at the graphic on page 5 of the notes there. You can see that the 1 and the A101 that are being used there, you can see that the 1 is a bit larger and is a slightly heavier typeface than the page number underneath it. The out-of-the-box Revit section head just makes me barf. It's like the same font above and below, and it's got no style to it. So you can see that the section head I've got there has got a little bit of a heavier boundary for the circle, and I've used a couple of different weights of the fonts, a sans serif font, so that my text below is a little bit lighter for my page number, and the text above for the section number is a little bit heavier. So again, just as you need to make this thing a little bit larger, so let's say I want to make this section head just a touch smaller. So what I do if I want to make this just a touch smaller, like I'm doing here, is I would take all of my text and the circle here, and I would move them to the right reference plane. Like so. I had to do that double move because it was less than 1/32 of an inch. So then I would move my reference plane over here, and then I have to adjust my filled regions to suit. So that's what I would do to make this bigger or smaller. So the left one moves, the right one stays where it is, and then I'd load it back into the project when I'm done. Enough about section heads. So continuing on with how we would modify everything in the template, you can either start with the callout head template, or you can modify the existing callout head that's in the architectural template, and whatever modifications you made to the section head for fonts and the line weights and stuff, you would do the same to your callout head. Now have a look at the callout head and the section head. You can see how the circle around the outside is a heavier line weight than the line in the middle. So to facilitate that, you have to use two different subcategories. See how the circle is callout heads? Line in the middle is callout heads. That means they both have to have the same line weight. So if I want to have a heavier line weight for the outside here, I need to make a new subcategory. So on the Manage tab, I will choose Object Styles. And right now, this family does not have any subcategories. So I click on Callout Heads, and I make a new one. I'll call this Medium Lines, because it's going to be a line weight of 3. and give it a line weight of 3 and hit OK. So now I would pick the circle on the outside and assign those circle pieces to the medium lines subcategories. Now you can see I've got that heavier line on the outside, and I would for sure play with the fonts, get everything a little bit more nicely centered, and then I could reload this back into my project and I'll get the extra heavier line weight there. So when I do a call out now, you folks can see that I've got that heavier line weight around the edge of my call out head because I redefined it from the architectural template, modified it, and then loaded it back into my template. I see on page 5 that I did it a different way around. So let me just talk about that. In the notes on page 5, the strategy that I used instead was to keep the boundary around the edge in the callout heads style, but instead in object styles to create a subcategory called thin lines that will have a line weight of 1. So now that that's been done, what would I do in this case is that the line in the middle would be thin lines, and the boundary circle would be call out heads. So now when I load this into my project, to get the heavy boundary around the edge, I have to change object styles here in the project. So just like with grid heads, where I made it a 3, I'm going to do the same with my call out heads. And you'll now see that there is a thin lines subcategory. And now my grid head, or my callout head rather, is thickened up. Now you might have noticed as well in object styles here in the project that that old subcategory I added, medium lines for callout heads, even though there are no medium lines in this family anymore, it's still here. It's like a leftover layer from a block. So in your project you can delete those subcategories that aren't being used. It's not going to make any difference because there's no graphics inside my section head that are making use of that subcategory. Okay, so let's go over to page 6. So what we're going to show you now is how to customize your call-out elevation and section graphics. Now Revit has a very convoluted method of defining these graphics in your project. So let's start with the elevations. So you can see the little elevation symbol on page 6 there, tag created and loaded into the project. Now, there's the elevation tag right there. So that symbol that you see on the screen, this box with the triangles that can be found around it, this is a nested family, as we will see in a few minutes. Here it is here. So this tag, the elevation tag with all the little pointers around it, is loaded into a project. So that's step 1. So that is listed here as elevation mark body square. So that is the family that will be used. Now, if you just load an elevation family, an elevation symbol, into your project, you'll never see it. You'll never see it. Because once you've loaded an elevation symbol into your project, you must then have a tag that refers back to the loaded family. Now you guys know you've got door tags and wall tags, right? Elevation, section, and callout tags they don't actually exist. It's just a dialog box. So when I say that, what we need to do is go to the Manage tab and go to Additional Settings, and you'll see here these three different kinds of tags. So whereas a wall tag is the symbol that you have when you tag a wall, and you've got a door tag and you've got a window tag. You guys know what those all are. Call out elevation and section tags are a dialog box. So let's stick with the elevation tags here. This is an elevation tag. It's a dialog box. It's okay, I'm Protestant, so I don't want to make fun of Catholics, but this is purgatory. It's the halfway between the tag and its final destination, which is an elevation style. So it's this halfway point. So the elevation tag simply records the family that's being used for this tag. It's the craziest bit of code I've ever seen in a piece of software. It literally does nothing. You got any Star Trek fans here? Am I the only Star Trek fan here? There was the panels that were on the outside on the corridors in the Enterprise. I can't remember which series it was, and they were labeled GNDN. And somebody asked, what does that mean? Goes nowhere, does nothing. That's what this dialog box is. It just sits here and records the family that's being loaded into the project as an elevation tag called half-inch square. Now what? Well, this tag, now that it refers to the family that you loaded in, can in turn be used by an elevation style. And this is horrible. I always apologize to my classes when I teach this part because it's a terribly awkward aspect of the software. So you load the family into your project, then you go to the Additional Settings dialog box, and you go to Elevation Tags, and you make sure that you've got a tag that's pointing to the family that you've loaded, right here. And then you hit OK. Now even at this point, your elevation tag might not necessarily be used because you need to make sure that your elevation tool, so when I start up the elevation command, right, here's an elevation type. There's two different elevation types, interior and building. And each of these elevation types refers to, in its type properties, an elevation tag. So the elevation type refers to a tag. The tag, which you find in the Manage tab under Additional Settings, the tag actually refers to the family. So, yeah, exactly, right? What? No, if you were SpongeBob, your tongue would fall out and roll out into a 60-foot long carpet. You'd be like, what? Why? Why? Why is this? I don't really know, folks. There's probably some reason in the code that this had to be done. So there's that sort of three-step process, and it's the same for sections. So if I load this section head filled into the family, for it to be seen at the end of my section line, I have to go to Additional Settings, and I have to go to Section Tags, and I have to make sure that I have a section tag defined that picks up this family. So now that it does, excellent. So I've got this one here. It's called section head filled, section tail filled. I'm going to make it easier for us to find it. I'm going to rename it and call it Bob. There we go. We have a section tag called Bob. Now, when I go and use the section tool now, before I even use it, I'm going to go over to the Properties box and look at the different section types that I have. I have detail, building, and wall. Now each of these three different section styles uses, you guessed it, a section tag. There it is there. This uses a section tag, Bob. So the name of the tag, of course, is up to you. Now what I would actually suggest that you do with your section tags, and your elevation tags as well. This one has a section head filled and then a tail. So this is good for a I'm going to rename it. I'll call it a partial section. Now, I don't know how many of your offices where they have a head at each end for a full section. So you've got a section that goes right through the building. You have one of those circular heads at both ends of the section line. So I'm going to make one that is that. So I'm going to call this a full section. So this section tag is going to use the head at both ends. So at the head, it's going to have the filled head. And then same at the other end. So now I have a section tag called full section. Now, I'm never going to see this tag in use unless I have a section style that makes use of this tag. So I've got this new section style here. So when I fire up the section command, and I go over my list of different kinds of sections that I have. Building section. Well, it's not using the full section one, it's using that partial section one. What does it look like? The partial section looks like this. It's got a head at one end, a tail at the other. Well, maybe I would like my building section to actually show heads at both ends. There. So now, instead of being partial section, it's going to be full section. And now I get a head at both ends. So you guys can it's kind of dawning on you now how this all works. So when you use any one of these tools, like you use the callout tool, and you go to the type properties here, and you look at the different kinds of callouts that you've got, the callout uses a callout tag. So same with your elevations, view and elevation. So this elevation uses the half-inch square elevation tag. Now, you know what? I don't like this. This is an exterior elevation. Because I also have an interior elevation. So I'm going to have my elevation style that's called exterior elevation, and my elevation tag is a square. For an interior elevation, it's a circle. Some offices flip that around. You feel free to modify the graphics as you see fit. So with callouts, sections, and elevations, it's a three-step process. You create the family, load it into your project, and then go into the appropriate tag dialog box and make sure that the tag is pointing to the right family. Then you have to go and use the appropriate view command, whether it's a section, callout, or an elevation, and just make sure that these different kinds of section, elevation, or callout styles are in turn referring to the right tag, which is in turn referring to the right family. It's the most bass-backwards bit of user interface work that I've ever seen in my life, and it's part of the proof that I've drunk the Kool-Aid and joined the cult. So be that as it may, at least we can show you folks how it works. Just before we move on to the next section here, I am going to point out again one of the things in Revit that you can paint yourself into a corner and really mess yourself up. It has to do with the callout tool. Now, I've mentioned this at various times during the intro course, and I'd like to go over it lots more times to make sure that you folks don't make this mistake. And it's only a limitation of the callout tool. Okay, if I've got a section, I can switch what kind of section style it is. So I can switch this from being a building section to a wall section. I can switch it from being a wall section to being a detail. Now, when that happens, you guys know that the view, so this is the one right here. This one that I'm working on right now. This little section is called sample section view. I've just named it. And watch what folder Revit puts it into as I switch what kind of a section style it is. So here it says detail views detail. I can switch it to building section, and look, puts it into a different folder. So if I have other sections that I've drawn in the project, right? So it's got folders for those sections as well. So when you've drawn a section or an elevation, you can switch it to any other kind of section style or elevation style, but not with callouts. This is big. When you use the callout tool, whatever you choose it to be at the beginning, a floor plan callout or a detail callout, so it shall forevermore be. So if I create it as a floor plan callout, once I'm done, I can't switch it to a detail callout. Likewise, if I use the callout tool and I make it a detail and draw it as a detail, after that point, I can't switch it to a floor plan callout. And you're all like, why? Because the dude who coded this left the Revit development team in like 2008, and no one's touched his code since. Nobody wants to. It's no joke. So it's been stuck with that limitation in Revit for as long as I can remember. It's goofy and it's stupid and it is what it is. Okay, over to page 8. So, just want to point out, I mentioned it to you earlier, that your elevation symbols are a nested family. The body, which is the little box that has the page number in the center, that is one family. Then the little pointer that's on the outside gets nested into the family where the box is. So if you go down and look in the project browser, you're going to see these under annotation symbols, elevation mark body square, elevation mark body circle. Those are the center bits of your elevation symbols. So here, this is the elevation body family. The pointers on the outside are nested in. So if you want to customize the graphics, you got to go into this family here. And then if you want to change the fonts, go ahead and do that. So you'd have to modify this family here, you know, change the fonts and size if you want to, and then load it back into this family and then load this back into your project. Now, there's not much more that you have to do, because you guys know that when you put an elevation in Revit, you know how you hit these little boxes to add and remove those views, right? Revit just does that automatically. There's no special programming that you have to do. So each of the 4 nested families that are inside your elevation symbol when you build it, they just get turned off and on automatically. You don't have to do anything. You just put the families in there initially and it's all good. Does anybody know one of the gotchas with these elevation tags? What's one thing you should not do when you're using an elevation tag? And it has to do with the views. And it has to do with the sheets that they are on. Anybody remember? Well, you can't have 2 views on the same elevation tag on separate sheets, because then Revit will not report a sheet number in the middle. It'll leave it blank. So if you are using one elevation tag, make sure that all the views that are being generated by this elevation tag, so in this case, all these 3 elevations need to be on the same sheet. And if that can't happen, then you need to make another elevation view in a separate tag. So if this one view here had to be on a separate sheet, then you'd have to do something like this. Remember that whenever you uncheck a box, you're deleting the view. So if you don't put a whole bunch of text or dimensions in there, as soon as I click this, they're gone. So yeah, little word to the wise there. Okay, we have dealt with everything up to page 10. So just in terms of getting started and creating your template file and then using it, you got to go into Revit's options dialog box so that you can point your staff or yourself to use this. So we got to go to the file menu, and then down to options. So here in the options dialog box under file locations, this is where you choose the different templates that Revit will see. The first template that you see in the list here will be the first one, or the automatically used one, when you start Revit up from scratch. So here, if I close Revit right down, so I'm just going to open up Revit again here. So now, when I open Revit up, that top template in the list will appear on the Revit desktop and will be the default template that gets opened when you hit File and then New. Seems like every year Revit takes longer and longer to open up after you've closed it down. So here, when I hit New, Revit is starting with the first template in that list. Okay. Well, no, not on my computer anyway. I think you folks might have the construction template. Oh, I do. But the list of templates that Revit shows in the options dialog box here, I could add more templates by hitting the plus, of course, and adding those extra templates to my view. Now, in terms of building a template, page 10, bringing in formatted schedules from a completed project. Now, so let's say here you're working on your template and you don't have a door schedule in your template yet. So you can see here, I do not have a door schedule yet. So a really neat way that you can add one from a project that you've already completed, create a new sheet in your template. Now once that sheet's created, what you need to do is copy a door schedule from a finished project on the sheet in the finished project and paste it into your title block on the template. You're like, what? Well, here, I'll show you. So here we've got a completed project with a fairly complicated door schedule. So you copy it from a sheet in the project to the sheet in the template. So I'm going to go down to the sheet where the doors are being listed. So there's my door schedule. So I just Control C, copy that door schedule from my project where the project is largely done. Then I go back to a page in my template, here it is, and I Control V, paste it. So I'm just pasting that door schedule in. Now of course there's no entries here yet. There's no doors in this project, but the schedule is here. So each time a new door gets added in the project, it'll get added to this schedule, and you'll see now that it added the door schedule from the project where I got it from. Pretty cool stuff. Okay. I'm going to skip the customizing the project browser right now. We'll come back to that a little bit later. I'll skip the stuff about the general tab. You guys can learn about that later. Very quick note here, just on hardware for your computer. When you go to Revit's options dialog box here, and you go to graphics, no, hardware. You want a computer that has what we call a video card. Now sometimes you'll buy a laptop or even a desktop that doesn't have a video card. So what that means is the graphics on your screen come from the motherboard on your computer or the motherboard on your laptop. Now motherboards are pretty good at connecting in your main processor, but they're not as good for putting the graphics up on your screen. So what you want to do when you're out buying a computer is you want to get a laptop or a desktop computer that has a separate video card. You will always get much better performance from Revit if you have a separate video card in your laptop or in your desktop. And so when you come to the hardware tab here, you want to make sure that you'll be able to see these check boxes. If you're using a computer that does not have good hardware in it, these boxes will not even be available to you. They'll be grayed out. And you're really hampering your, on a big project, Revit can get quite slow unless you've got some dedicated hardware in your computer to handle things. Enough about that. Okay, last thing that we're going to talk about tonight is title blocks and the revision schedule that's inside it. We'll just take a quick moment here to talk about keyboard shortcuts. So just go to page 12. Now, as I'm working away on the screen here, you've probably noticed that I do not go into the ribbon very much to find a command. In fact, it may look like I'm some sort of Revit ninja because it doesn't look like anything's happening. I just hit some buttons and stuff begins to happen on the screen. And that's just because keyboard shortcuts are always the fastest way to work. The problem is being able to sometimes memorize what you had for your keyboard shortcuts. But if you type in KS, so I've got a pretty long list of added commands that I put into Revit over the years just to make things a little bit faster. Now, Revit already has a pretty good list of shortcuts for things like walls. So when you put your cursor over the wall tool, you folks can see in brackets WA, and then for door, DR, and so on. So I can draw WA and start the wall command, and I have a keyboard shortcut so I can switch to drawing a rectangle while I'm drawing my walls. So this means that instead of having to come up here and hit rectangle, I've got a keyboard shortcut that will allow me, while I'm drawing walls, to switch to rectangle mode or to draw a circle while I am drawing my walls. So that's all in the keyboard shortcuts dialog box as well. So here I can ask Revit to draw a floor and then do 4 lines and then finish without ever having to go up and hit the finish. Like so, instead of having to go up here and hit the green check mark, I've got a keyboard shortcut FE for finish edit, right? So I've tried to use keyboard shortcuts that make sense. So I type in FE and I'm done. So it's a nice way to kind of speed things up so that you can be efficient. If you want my keyboard shortcuts, I'm happy to give them to you. They also have a Word document that lists them all out, and they tend to be compatible with all the shortcuts that are in the software. So once you've got some keyboard shortcuts that you like, you can export them to an XML file, and then you can give that to a colleague or your friends, whoever else is using Revit with you. All right, enough there. Let's talk about title blocks. Now, when you're using title blocks in your office, just give you a few good suggestions here. Now, if you look on page 12, you folks will see the same title block that we've got up here on the screen. So here is the title block family. Now, how many people have used an HP plotter where they were hoping that the plot will come out widthwise in the plotter? Instead, the damn thing rotates at 90 degrees and gives you a nice 12 or 24 inch white space on the side of the print that you have to trim off yourself later. Anybody? I've done that at least a couple hundred times. So you've got a 3 foot wide roller HP printer, and I've got a 3 foot wide sheet. Please print out the 3 foot wide sheet widthwise, please. And it took me a while until I realized what it is that these stupid plotters want. Here's the secret. You need to know what the margins are on your plotter. How far to the edge of the sheet can your plotter handle? So in most cases it's usually 3/4 on the leading edge or something like that, and like a 1/4 inch on the trailing edge and 1/2 inch on the sides, sometimes a bit less. Now, when you're making your own title block, let me give you a really big tip. Draw the exterior edges of the sheet to its actual size. So here I've got an Arch D title block, 36 by 24. These outer lines around the edges, I've changed them to be the invisible lines style. Now, what does this mean? It means when I use it in a project, when I mouse over the title block, I see these lines. See the title block there? Watch when I put my cursor on it. That allows me to see the ultimate edge of the sheet. But when I send the print job off to the plotter, those invisible lines don't go. So the mistake I was making earlier in my career is that when I was drawing the lines of my title block, I drew them right at the edge. So those lines got sent to the printer and the printer said, "Oh, you want to print those lines too? Well, shoot, I'm going to have to rotate the paper to make that work." So if I'd made those as invisible lines, it wouldn't have been a problem. So you can draw your title blocks, the paper sizes, actual sizes, invisible lines, and then inset everything from there. Now, if you've got a company logo in a JPEG or PNG format, you can put that in at the top. And then it's just a case of putting in your labels for the project name, the project address, scale, and so on. That's all stuff you guys can figure out on your own. I want to talk about the revision schedule on page 13. This is something that tends to be a little more complicated. Okay, so what I want you folks to see here is I have some revisions that are being shown here in a list on my title block. The list of revisions that you see here comes from a list of revisions that are defined in the project. So go to Manage, Additional Settings, Revisions. This is where you define the revisions for your project. And so here are all the different revisions that were used in this project. 7 revisions. Now, here's the cool thing about how Revit's revisions work. If I am in a floor plan and a revision occurs, so on the Annotate tab, so once you define your revisions on the Manage tab, you can go and use the Revision Cloud tool. So when you're using the Revision Cloud tool, in the Properties palette, you can choose which revision we're talking about here. So if I've got this addendum here and I want to bubble off an area where this revision applies to, so I've got an addendum here, so maybe the sales office got added. So when I'm done, oh, it didn't show. I'll bet you that's because I've got it turned off. Yeah, it doesn't appear. So here you can, when you're done with the revision, later on you can hide it. So there we go. So now I can tag my revision. So this is revision 4. So I've got a nice little triangle there indicating that this revision is happening here. As soon as I cloud a revision in a drawing, the sheet that this drawing is on will automatically get that revision added to the sheet. So that's a really cool feature. You cloud an area, throw that view on a sheet, boom, it will show up in the revision schedule on your sheet. So when this feature was added to Revit, I was like, that is stinking awesome. I'm going to add that to my template. So adding the bubbles in your view is easy. Adding the revision schedule to your project title block, to your title block rather, is a little more difficult. So I'm going to walk you through that process. So, to add a revision schedule to your project, you go to the View tab in your title block and you add a revision schedule. So now you need to decide what needs to be in the schedule. Now typically all you need is the number, date, and the description in that order. So you don't need the sequence usually. You need the number and the date and the description. Now here's the really weird thing. After you create this schedule, this is what it looks like. It'll show up in your project browser as revision schedule, and now what you need to do to have it show up on your title block is this is a really crazy part. Let's look at the second paragraph on page 13. Once a schedule has been created, it will show up in the project browser under Schedules. Open the sheet view for the title block. It lists as a minus in the project browser under Sheets. How do you open the sheet view, folks? Look at this. You see a little minus there? Double click it. That's why you come to this course. Can you imagine trying to be the full sucker? It's like, where do I find the sheet? Oh, you double click the minus. You double click something which means nothing or less than nothing. Oh, that's intuitive. So you drag and drop the revision schedule into the view. So there you go. Now, if you don't want these headings to appear, it's up to you. You can decide whether you want them to appear or not. And you can decide whether you want it titled or not. So what we did with ours is that our revision schedule has no title and it has no heading columns either. So this one here, this revision schedule, that's it. It's blank. But then what we did is we asked it to be rotated sideways. So after we put it in place, we grabbed the rotate command and we rotated it. So it would be sideways on the, oh no, it wasn't there. There was another thing we did. Where is it here? Rotation on sheet, there it is. So once the schedule's on the sheet, you can rotate it counterclockwise, and that's where our revision schedule sits down here. So yes, it's a little bit of fussing about to create it initially, but once you've added it to your title block, and you've added the title block to your template, it's an amazing feature that's definitely worth having in your template. Okay, so that is it for me for tonight. So you guys have got 45 minutes to work on the term project, or have me answer any questions that you have.